Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Akilah Weber. I am the California State Assembly member for the 79th Assembly District. Thank you all so much for being here. As Secretary of the California Legislative Black Caucus, I am happy to welcome our esteemed community members, elected officials, staff, and everyone else who helped coordinate today's event. I am deeply honored to stand before you today as we gather to address a matter of profound importance: the state of Black Californians and the ongoing effort to enact reparations in our state. As a representative of this great state, I am acutely aware of the historical injustices that have disproportionately impacted Black Californians. From the legacies of slavery and segregation to the persistent systemic barriers that persist to this day, our Black communities have endured immense challenges on the path to equity and justice. At this time, I'd like to recognize a few people who are either currently here or are registered to be here later on this morning. First off, over here we have our great Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber. We have Senator Stephen Bradford, Vice Chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus. Assemblymember Corey Jackson. Assemblymember Mike Gibson. I have not seen him yet, but we have Assemblymember David Alvarez. We also have with us today Assemblymember Brian Mainshine. San Diego County Board of Supervisors, District 4, Supervisor Monica Montgomery Stepp. City of Lemon Grove Mayor Raquel Vasquez. City of San Diego Councilmember Henry Foster III. City of La Mesa Councilmember Patricia Dillard. City of Lemon Grove Councilmember Allison Snow. I'm not sure if I've seen her yet. We have San Diego Unified School Board Trustee Dr. Sharon Whitehurst Payne. And we have San Diego Unified School District Superintendent Dr. Lamont Jackson. We will also be joined by representatives from the offices of U.S. Senator Alex Padilla, Congressmember Juan Vargas, Governor Gavin Newsom, State Senator Steve Padilla, San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria, and City Council members Raul Campillo and Marnie Von Wolpart. So today we come together not only to acknowledge these injustices, but to reaffirm the California Legislative Black Caucus commitment to rectifying many of the harms outlined in the California Reparations Task Force. The call for reparations is not merely an acknowledgement of past wrongs, it is a moral imperative, a recognition of the debt owed of Black Californians who have suffered and persevered in the face of systemic oppression. In California, we are very proud to be at the forefront of this very critical conversation. We understand that reparations are not just about financial compensation, but about addressing the deep-rooted inequalities that continue to plague our society. It is about investing in education, health care, housing, and economic opportunities that have been denied from Black Californians for far too long. As we gather here today, we must remember that the journey towards reparative justice will not be easy. It will require courage, persistence, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about our past. but it is a journey that we must undertake together. We will need everyone in this room to stand with the California Legislative Black Caucus as we take on this monumental task. Thank you to each and every one of you that are here today on this Juneteenth weekend. There are many other events that you could have chosen to be at, but we hope that you find this session today very informative and you leave with a renewed sense of progress. Next, I'd like to invite to the podium the principal of this school that are hosting us today at Crawford, Dr. Villery.
Welcome, esteemed guests. We're delighted to have you with us today. Big thank you to Dr. Shirley Weber and Dr. Akila Weber for facilitating this awesome event and for choosing to host this conversation at Crawford. I'd like to also thank our Board of Education representative, Dr. Whitehurst Payne, and our superintendent, Dr. Jackson, and Deputy Sup, Dr. Bagula, for their support. I'd like to share a little bit about Crawford High School and what makes this place very special to lead, teach, and learn at. Crawford is one of the most beautifully diverse schools in the state, where 40 countries are represented, 35 languages and 72 dialects are spoken. Many of our students are bilingual and trilingual. They are newcomers to America and have immigrated from countries where getting a formal education is not an option or not attainable if they're a female. Our families are highly motivated and have a high respect for educators. Crawford is also home to more Black and African students than any other high school in our district. We feel blessed to prepare and inspire students to graduate from high school for a life of their choosing, where they envision a wealth of possibilities, whether that be college, vocation, or career. There's so much to celebrate, so I start from a place of gratitude. I want to extend a heartfelt thanks to all of the delegates and representatives for your unwavering advocacy on behalf of all students, but especially Black youth. Your support for our schools and your dedication to addressing the issues facing the Black community as students transition into adulthood is invaluable. I'd like to highlight a few areas that evidence your influence and positive impact. Crawford High School was ranked number 2 among high schools for student voter registration in San Diego. Yes. We had the second highest number of students registered to vote this year, ensuring their voices can be heard in the democratic process. Crawford High School is ranked number 1, having the highest number of students applying for financial aid in San Diego Unified, and boasts the highest number of FAFSA applications submitted. This remarkable achievement reflects the dedication, hard work of our students, counselors, staff, and parents. The success of our restorative justice program, recognized at a recent board meeting, has been transformative for our school community. Through this program, we have trained students to become peer mediators, equipping them with skills in conflict resolution and guiding their peers in taking responsibility for their actions and repairing harm. As a result, we have provided our students with more peaceful and safe ways to diffuse and resolve conflicts, fostering a more harmonious school environment. Sometimes this work can be hard, but we lead with love, knowing that it's also heart work. We have a thriving medical pathways program. We partner with Dr. Levy, Chief of Neurology at the Rady Children's Hospital, where 32 recent graduates of color are on their way to becoming doctors, nurses, and medical practitioners. Our Law Academy, yes. Our Law Academy students are fortunate to be mentored by 42 local lawyers and attorneys who visit our campus each month to provide advice, guidance, and resources to those who want to study law and litigious fields of study. We had 2 valedictorians, V. Dang and Jenny Tran, both received a full ride scholarship, the Chancellor Scholarship to UCSD. Our salutatorian, Christopher Ruiz, full ride Questbridge Scholarship to Boston University. Kimmy Dang, full ride scholarship to Yale. Maddie Brewster, full ride to Colorado College, to name a few. All of these scholars, born, raised, taught, in the Crawford cluster. Needless to say, I'm a very proud principal. Thank you again to all of our elected representatives. Thanks for instilling hope, for inviting us today, and for being steadfast champions of education and equity. With deep appreciation for your tireless advocacy on behalf of the Crawford High School community, we salute you and we thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Villery, for opening your doors here and allowing for us to host this amazing event. This next individual who will be coming to speak for you all actually needs no introduction at all, so I could just tell her to come on up. But Dr. Shirley Weber is our Secretary of State. But before California recognized how amazing she was, we here in San Diego have known that for a very long time. She has broken ground in so many different areas, whether it was with her being one of the founding members for the Black Studies Department of San Diego State, all of the lives that she touched in the 40 years of teaching there, the young lives that she touched while she was on the San Diego Unified School Board. She broke barriers, becoming the first Black elected to the California Legislature south of Los Angeles. And she once again broke barriers, becoming the first Black American to be California Secretary of State and the second San Diegan to ever be a constitutional officer in the state of California. But we celebrate her today not because of those accomplishments, or not just because of those accomplishments, but we recognize that we would not be here today if it were not for her. Her bill established the Reparations Task Force, which allowed those individuals to really dig deep into the history of California with the assistance of the Attorney General's office, and to develop an amazing, very thick book, over 1,100-page report. And as I tell my colleagues on the assembly floor every time I speak up on one of our reparation bills, they need to read the report. You need to read the report. And if you say 1,100 pages is too long, then I would implore you to at least read the executive summary. There is so much information in that report that I had no idea about. And I think I know a lot about Black history, being raised by someone who taught in Black studies. But I realized how little I knew about the history, and more importantly, how little I knew about Black history here in California. I've lived in the South, went to college in the South, worked in the Midwest. And there's a perception that there were no harms done to Blacks in California. You need to read that report, and you will definitely think different. But there would be no report. We would not be here today if it's not for our next speaker, our Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Nash Weber.
Good morning. Good morning. Oh, you still remember me, huh? Sometimes I say good morning and you go, good morning. And I say, oh, you forgot me already. You know I love a living audience. So it's good to be with you this morning. I want to thank all of my colleagues who've come down from Sacramento who are here with us today, members of the Assembly and the Senate. And I'm very grateful to see them, to have them here on the panel, to have this discussion going on, as well as those who are not in the Black Caucus but who are also here, and the number of elected officials who are here at this session today. I hope that all of you will get a lot of information here from it, that you'll seek out to get a copy of the task force, because even though it's 1,100 pages, It's filled with a tremendous amount of information. It has sections. So if you just make it your commitment to read a little bit every night, to decide you're going to do 20, 25 pages a day, you'll discover that you're reading more than 25 pages because you'll be so enthralled with it, and how it was written and how it's put together is extremely, extremely knowledgeable with all kinds of information, and you will find yourself motivated to understand why the task force and why reparations is so very important in California. I'm Dr. Shirley Weber. As mentioned, I was your first African American to serve as an assembly member here in the San Diego County area. And part of my agenda as an elected official was always to figure out where the holes were and how we had been left out of so many different things in California. And some of you know a lot of my work that was done in terms of social justice, in terms of education, all those kinds of things, working with young people, making sure our universities were responsive to young people, making sure that we had opportunities for students to use their EBT cards at all of our CSU systems, food banks and campuses, and it goes on, as well as working with those who had been unjustly incarcerated and making sure that they had things when they came out of jail after being 15, 20 years unjustly incarcerated, making sure they had an opportunity to go to schools and to universities and have housing and those kinds of things. And so tried to fill up the holes of injustice in California. And that became my mantra. And I remember, as I pointed out to one of my colleagues, probably the proudest moment I had in the assembly was when we were fighting for some issues, and we just had a Martin Luther King celebration, and one of my colleagues, I think it was Bradford, stood up and called me the moral conscience of the legislature. And I took that very seriously, because I realized that sometimes we forget what our responsibilities are, or we lose sight of the history and the moment that we have to make change. The bill, they asked me to address why this bill was done and why was it necessary and what was the history behind 3121. As you know, the Congress had tried for 40 years to pass H.R. 40, which was a reparations bill for the nation. And they always came short. You know, they'd have so many people who would vote for it and what have you, but they never ever got to an amount that would allow this task force bill to move forward at the national level. So it was in 2019 that one of my colleagues, as we did every year, passed a resolution supporting the Congressional Black Caucus with regards to the bill that they were putting forward in H.R. 40, knowing in our hearts that it would fail because it didn't have the momentum, it didn't have the interest, and people spoke against it and so forth and so on. So in 2019, after having watched that again for the umpteenth time, and we were in the midst of doing some very important work, I decided that I was going to do a reparations bill. And, you know, sometimes you just make a decision that it's our time, that we need to do it. And I felt very strongly that given the work that the caucus had done, that we had all done in the legislature, given the diversity of California's legislature right now, that we could get this passed. People didn't think we could, but I believe we could. And so I put forth the bill along with a lot of my other bills. And it was amazing because in that one session, in that 6 months, we passed 3121, the Black Caucus. And I can remember us and many committees when we put the bill forward. We had some of our friends who didn't want to vote for it. Some of those who claimed to be our friends, who had been on various task forces with us, and they said they felt that it would divide California, that if we put a reparations bill forward, it would divide California. And this was the same comment I had gotten from my congressman when I had a radio program, when I talked about the reparations bill in D.C. He said, oh, if we do that, Shirley, it would divide California. It would divide the nation. I said, isn't it not already divided? You know, he said, but the people will be very angry. I said, does anybody care that I'm angry? Why do I always have to care about other people being angry about me, but nobody's concerned about me being angry about them? I mean, it was just this kind of ongoing historic discussion of why we need to continue to suffer and endure pain while others basically did not endure the same level of pain and conflict. So I have always fought for reparations because I knew that it was an injustice. And I also knew that we had given reparations to so many other people in this nation, that we had given reparations 2 and 3 times to our Jewish brothers and sisters. We'd given reparations to our Japanese Americans. We'd given reparations to countries and places that we weren't even involved with the harm that was created. And yet we felt the need to restore for those individuals because of the injustice that had taken place. And yet no one felt that we deserved reparations. that every time there was a conversation, people were wondering why. Why would we want reparations? Why would we want to upset the apple cart? Why would we want to change what we're doing without any understanding at all of what was happening? And then it became even more critical in California because affirmative action had been killed in California. And nothing could be done based on race. So I realized then that everything had to be done based on harm and injustice. And that we had the right to ask for reparations, to restore us back to hopefully a healthy situation where we could grow and develop. We use the UN model in terms of what you're supposed to do for reparations across the world. So we had at least the backing of the international community with regards to reparations, that people all around the world were asking for reparations when they had been harmed. And there were very specific things they said you had to do in reparations. You had to have restitutions. You had to have compensation. You had to have rehabilitation. You had to have some satisfaction on the part of the people. And you had to have a guarantee of non-repetition, that they would not be repeated again, that the harm would go away. And so these things were the foundation for the UN's efforts to deal with reparations. And when I spoke before the UN, I realized that there were people from all over the world who were there at the reparations meeting that were asking for reparations, that we had felt we were isolated, but no, this is the standard that is across the nation, across the world, that we should do reparations. So we passed our reparations bill, and the beauty of it is it passed on a bipartisan basis, because we have been doing some work with all of our colleagues about what is necessary, and this was a study that we wanted to do. So it took about 1.5 years to finish the study. And we had the governor and the pro tem and the speaker basically appointed a commission of 9 to work on it. And Bradford and Joan Sawyer from our assembly represented us there. But there were others who represented us from the community. Monica Montgomery was a standing member on the task force from San Diego. Tony Atkins appointed her. And so we had a great commission that really fought hard to make sure that there was excellent information and that information was given to you. And so as a result of that, after the 1.5 years of the task force moving forward and basically bringing in a lot of researchers, we were funded by the governor's office because I made it the governor's task force so that he would have to fund the task force and not the caucus's task force. And the governor signed the bill, and it became law. And California became the first state to actually do reparations as a state effort. The good thing is that many took up that and began to realize that they could do some things too. So we had a lot of cities. We've had a number of nonprofits. Most recently, Berkeley decided they were going to do reparations in their public school system. San Francisco has a reparations task force. Los Angeles has one. And across the nation, there are various cities that have task forces that are addressing different issues, sometimes housing, sometimes education. But we're the one who has a state commission, and it is incumbent upon us to respond to the issues that have been raised in the booklet, in the task force report, and to make sure that California becomes the light and moves forward, because the world is looking at us to see if we could do what no one has been able to do in 400 years in terms of justice for African Americans. So I'm proud of the fact that we're here today. We have this unique opportunity. We have many of our members of the Assembly here, and they're listening to it. And this tour is designed to motivate you, to educate you and your family and your friends about the task force and the recommendations. And it should not be just, oh, I got it, it was good. No, it's going to take an army to get this out of the Assembly, to get this passed, to get these laws implemented, and to get the funding for it to happen. It is going to take all of you to put every bit of energy you have into it to make a difference for our community and for the nation. The fact that we have never given African Americans reparations is a blemish on this country. And Malcolm X talked about it when he was going to the UN to talk about injustices. He knew that the nation and the world had standards for justice, and California this nation had never met those standards. Reparations is one of those standards they need to meet for African Americans for the 400 years of injustices that we have suffered. So I'm really pleased about this. It was my honor to do this, to bring this forward. I'm so excited about the energy that so many of you have. I'm grateful to all of you for what you have done, for your work, but we have only begun. And I want you to understand that, and that our success in pushing this forward will take all of us to do what we can at Sacramento and here in San Diego and all around. So when you get the call that a bill is important and is coming before the House or before the governor's desk, it is then your time to get organized, to get your letters in, if we're having a rally, to make your presence felt in Sacramento, but we have to make sure that this takes place. And it takes all of us to really, really move this from every community that we have. So once again, thank you so very much. I'm looking forward to hearing from my colleagues, and thank you once again for all of your support.
Thank you so much, Secretary Weber. We are so grateful that you can come and join us this morning and really kind of give the background on how we got to where we are today. Next, I would like to invite up to speak the Vice Chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus, who also served on the California Reparations Task Force, Senator Steve Bradford from Senate District 35, to kind of talk about what they did as the task force to be able to produce that 1,100-plus page report. So, Senator Bradford.
Thank you, Dr. Weber squared and Dr. Shirley Weber. We have a policy in the legislature that we do not follow Dr. Weber. Once she speaks, you drop her mic, so I don't know what I'm doing here now, but it's truly an honor to be here and be one of those 9 that was selected to serve on the Reparations Task Force over the last 2 years and be a part of that final report that was submitted a year ago this month to the legislature. And I, along with now Supervisor Montgomery Stepp, served on that task force. Reggie Jones Sawyer, the only other member that was part of the legislature, and Dr. Grills and Don Tamaki. It was truly eye-opening. And I stand here as an individual who's both of my parents college educated, relatives who were educators, and, living your life thinking that you knew something and thinking that you had a great understanding of what slavery was in this state and in nation, I should say, and the the effects of it both then and after and going forward. But after 2 years on that task force, it was eye-opening. And I think Supervisor Montgomery Stepp will tell you it was a learning experience for so many of us. It was eye-opening. And I learned, as someone who, like I say, being college educated, and I think one of my biggest mistakes was dropping Dr. Shirley Weber's class as a freshman, so I probably would have been better prepared for this task force, because she was teaching stuff that we didn't hear in school. I mean, it's a saying, there's stories that made America, and then the stories that America has made up. Much of what we teach in school are the stories that America have made up. Because if we taught the real truth, we would know the tremendous contributions and sacrifices that African descendants have made to this country. This is not the greatest nation in the world just because of happenstance. It was because of over 300 years of free labor by people who look like me, who suffered and toiled and lost their lives in order to build this nation. And 2 of our most wealthiest industries in this country are insurance and banking, and they made the majority of their money off of slaves. And people don't understand that. And we've been talking about reparations and what should it look like. Let me be clear. Reparations is not charity. It's not a handout. It's not something, a gift. It is something that is owed, something that was promised, and something that's 160 years overdue. And many times people say, well, where's my check? And I often said during the 26 meetings and hearings that we had, reparations was never really about a check. Because if you understand generational wealth in this country, it's not about what you have in a bank. It's about what you own on the ground. Wealth in this country was about land. And that's what reparations initially was, about 40 acres and a mural for all those descendant slaveries. But I will defend the argument for a check, because you know who got a check at the end of slavery? Slave owners, because they were insured. Those insurance companies that are now billion-dollar industries insured every slave, and those slave owners were paid. I didn't know that. until I served on this task force. And Dr. Shirley Weber 2.0, who's an amazing physician and obstetrician, many of the practices that we have in medicine is because of what they learned experimenting on slave bodies, both live and our corpses. Many people don't know they perfected C-sections because slave owners wanted to extract the babies from those slaves so they could sell them sooner. But many people don't know that. So we have been at the forefront of what it is that has built this nation. And now it's time for us to understand that debt that is owed, and understand many of the laws that exist, I should say, on the books post-slavery was the direct results of slavery. Dr. Shirley Weber also passed a piece of legislation a number of years ago dealing with use of deadly force by law enforcement. And when that bill was moving through the legislature, I would ask people, do you know when use of deadly force was implemented in California? And many people say, oh, in the 40s, in the 50s. No. Does anybody know when it was implemented? 1872. And what happened in 1872? It was 7 years after people like us were free. And law enforcement said they needed a tool now to use deadly force to justify killing us. You need to understand history. Please understand that trespassing, vagrancy laws, many of those did not exist until after 1865. They weren't on the books, but they had to put them on the books now because we were free with no place to go, and this gave law enforcement a right to arrest us and put us back on a plantation that we were just freed from. We need to understand the laws that exist on the books, like restrictive covenants that prevented you from buying houses in specific neighborhoods. And I ask folks, when did we end restrictive covenants in the United States? A lot of folks don't know. In 1948, two black lawyers, Thurgood Marshall and Lauren Miller, won that fight in the U.S. Supreme Court. But restrictive covenants were implemented almost immediately after we were freed as slaves to prevent black folks from buying homes or living in specific neighborhoods. And know what we replaced restrictive covenants with across the nation? A lot of people don't know. R1, R2, and R3. When you hear local elected officials hiding behind, oh, we can't put apartment buildings in this neighborhood because it's zoned R1, R2, that wasn't implemented until 1950, shortly after the striking down of restrictive covenants. So we need to understand that history and understand many of the racist laws that are on the books or biased laws on the books were directly in response to free black people in the United States. And then people often ask, why California? California was a free state. We were a free state in name only. If you were brought here as a slave, you were treated as a slave. If you gave birth as a slave, your child was born as a slave. And many people didn't realize we had a Fugitive Slave Act law. So if you ran away from Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, and you came to California, they returned you back to that state and that plantation that you ran away from. So for all intents and purposes, California was very much a slave state. And another piece that I learned that I was unaware, the first governor of the state of California, a gentleman by the name of Peter Burnett, he owned slaves. But he had passed an executive order in 1850 to try to get rid of all blacks in the state of California. A lot of people were unaware of that. And I will finish with this about the taking of land. I was honored to be the author of SB 796 that returned Bruce's Beach. Are you familiar with Bruce's Beach? The property in Manhattan Beach that Charles and Willa Bruce, two black individuals, bought in 1912 and created a beach resort in Manhattan Beach, only for the city to use eminent domain to take that property away from that family because they didn't want to see these successful black folks recreating at the beach because of their hatred, and they used the law to commit a crime. Well, what I learned during the task force, there were many Bruce's Beaches. There were Julian, down here in San Diego County right now. That was a black area that black miners discovered gold there. But once they discovered gold, they moved blacks off that land. It was a amazing testimony on my piece of my legislation the other day by Miss Jessie Johnson, a woman who lived in the city of Russell City in California. Anybody know about Russell City? Yeah. It doesn't exist anymore because it was a black and brown town that they got rid of and annexed into the city of Hayward today because blacks were very successful there. So we've used eminent domain, we've used, all kind of racial practices to eliminate black folks from land, from businesses, and it's all a result, and I learned most of this, and a lot of this, I should say, during that task force. It was eye-opening, and as Dr. Shirley Weber stated, if you don't have time to read all 1,100 pages, read the executive summary. That's what I've encouraged every one of my colleagues in the legislature. We have a series of bills that are moving through the legislature, and a lot of our Republican colleagues don't want to vote for it. I was able to move 3 of my bills this week. 1403, which stands up to infrastructure, the Freedmen Affairs Bureau that will allow you to have oversight and this, moving the reparations forward and helping identify those communities, individuals who are eligible based on the terms that Dr. Weber established, descendants of chattel slavery, so we'll help them with their lineage and tracking their backgrounds and things of that nature. But you need an agency to do that. And with some folks say, oh, we don't need that agency. But we have an agency of tribal affairs to help our Native Americans determine where their land was and those things that they had rights to. So we need that agency. We also passed 1050, which, again, deals with the racially motivated taking of property through eminent domain, again, similar to what we saw in Bruce's Beach. And I forgot so many cities. We can even talk about the town of Allensworth, a prosperous town that was established in 1908 by Colonel Allensworth with every intention of creating the Tuskegee of the West. And what did government officials do? They stopped the trains from stopping in that town to end all the revenue that was coming in. They cut off the water, and they poisoned the wells. Now it's a state park. Has anybody visited it? It's a state park, but it's not to the standard of what it should be. That's why I secured $40 million 2 years ago, so we can bring Allensworth up back to the level that it deserves so people can recognize it, but also to understand our history. So I was honored to serve on that task force. I learned so much at that point during that 2-year period. I also want to thank the Attorney General's office for all the support that they gave us during that process, and hundreds, if not thousands, of people who came out to the 26 hearings that we had all across the state of California. You were heard. Your voices were important to us doing what we did, and that final report is the results of that work. So on behalf of the California Legislative Black Caucus, we need your support in order to move that legislation forward. In order for that final report to have meaning, we have to pass legislation. So thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to being on the panel later on today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Bradford, for all you have done over your 12 years in the legislature and all you have done in regards to reparations. And thank you so much for dropping some of those tidbits that you would be able to find when you read the Reparations Task Force report. You know, our first governor of this great state was a very interesting individual. Very racist individual, didn't want slavery in California, not because he didn't believe that there shouldn't be slavery, but because if there was slavery here, then that would mean that black people would be here, and he was very clear that he did not want blacks in the state of California. You all are familiar with Plessy versus Ferguson, a Supreme Court case that established separate but equal. Well, you know how we say how California goes, the rest of the nation goes? California put its imprint on that 22 years before Plessy versus Ferguson, when the California Supreme Court ruled that segregation in public schools was legal. So we always look at California now as it's a very liberal state, but some of the very harsh and racist and segregationist laws that were put forward throughout the nation started here in California. Next, I'd like to turn the podium to Manuel Pastor with the USC Equity Research Institute, who will give us some data about how Black San Diegans are facing in regards to our counterparts.
Great. Well, while I get the PowerPoint up and running, which they just did, great, thank you. Let me just say that I knew many things about Dr. Shirley Weber. I had not realized that you were the second San Diegan to hold statewide office. The first, of course, was Pete Wilson. So this has been a major step up. It's a little bit like going from Vanilla Ice to Kendrick Lamar. A super improvement. So I'm going to present a little bit of data on Black California and Black San Diegans. If while I'm talking my voice tires out a bit, you might think it's because my train last night got delayed by 3 hours. Terrible. It's not that. It's that I have a voice condition called spasmodic dysphonia. Spasms around the voice box cause your voice to break. This is true. It gets treated once a month with Botox, which is how we treat everything in Los Angeles. It totally works for us. So I want to remind us that we've been through a very difficult last 4 or 5 years. COVID was the disease that revealed our illnesses as a society. A racial wealth gap so that some people did not have a cushion to survive. The lack of legal status for many Californians. The inadequate access to health care. All of that occurred at exactly the moment that the murder of George Floyd revealed, both to Americans who had not known about it, the nature of racist policing. But even more than that, that racist policing is the tip of a racist iceberg in terms of inequalities in our economy, environment, education, etc. And so we are in a moment in which we really should not be using, as some did, the language of recovery. Because who would want to go back to a normal that did not work for so many? Instead, we need to be talking about reimagination, restructuring, and renewal. And part of that, of course, is the fourth R, reparations. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about the data for the state demographically and for San Diego. And then I want to talk about what I would think of when we look at economics, education, and the environment. Another way of thinking about reparations is about asset stripping. That we live in a state that has actively stripped assets from black folks, from Latinos, Asians, and Native Americans, of course, as well. Today the focus is on black folks in the state of California. So this is the demographics moving from our past and moving to the future for the state of California. You'll know that it's about the year 1998 that California became a majority people of color state. This is something that will happen in the nation by about the year 2045. We went through a period of rapid demographic change, and it's the period in which we saw all the attacks that Dr. Weber was talking about. The attack on immigrants with Proposition 187, which was part of a set of racial propositions that then targeted affirmative action, bilingual education, and so much more. What you could see, though, is that for the state of California, really the share of the state that are black Californians is pretty stable in terms of the projections going forward. What does that look like for San Diego? Similarly, pretty stable, about 4 to 5%. But there's a lot of demographic change occurring beneath that. Let's look at some maps, because who does not like a map? So this is San Diego in 1990. Each dot represents 150 black folks. And what I'm going to do is move these maps forward a decade at a time, and I want you to look at the pattern that emerges. Going from 1990 to 2000 to 2010 to 2020, what you notice is a phenomena that's going on really around the state and certainly around the country, which is the dispersal of the black population. Movement into the suburbs. If you're in LA, it's a movement away from South LA into the rest of Los Angeles County and then into the Inland Empire. If you're in the East Bay, it's a movement out of Oakland into other areas. By the way, in the process of doing the research for this, do you know what is the blackest county in the state of California? Good guess, but wrong. Solano. Vallejo. Because people are being forced out of San Francisco, out of Oakland, and they're moving further and further away. So you could take a look at that dispersal in 2020 for the larger county. But you could see that it's been a movement eastward and northward. A couple of other things is that despite the fact that the share of black folks in the state is pretty stable, what is interesting is that if you look at hate crimes by bias in the state of California, the group that consistently experiences the most hate crimes, even though it's really a very small, only 5%, that's less than the share of Asians or the share of Latinos. You can see that the orange line there is hate crimes that are anti-black or anti-African American, not only consistently higher, but spiked in the last couple of years. So demographic change has slowed down, hate crimes have not. What does that look like in San Diego? Again, the highest share of number of hate crimes is occurring against black folks in San Diego, even though if you went back and looked at that data, it's the smallest so-called minority group. By the way, I don't use minority very often because in California now, every group is a minority group. So, more demographic data. I'll complicate this just in a little bit, but what this tries to take a look at is for the United States, California, San Diego City, whether or not people are living in the same state that they were born in, or if living in this state, they moved in from a different state. Or if they're foreign born, so they moved in from a different country. So it's people who live in California, whether or not they were born in California, whether or not they were born in another state, whether or not they were born abroad. Does that make sense? So what you can see here is something kind of interesting about San Diego, because we're doing this for 7 different regions for the Black Freedom Fund, which is that this is an area that has a lot of people, black folks, who moved in from other states. Pretty high share of immigrants, too, get to that in a minute, but a pretty high share of people who moved in from other states. Who are those people? A lot of them are veterans. I want you to look at the right-hand side. You have, by the way, a lot of female veterans here, too, but I broke it by gender. So for California, about 15% of white Californians who are older than 25 are veterans. About 16% of black Californians are veterans. But go to San Diego, 25% of men older than 25 in the state, in San Diego County, are veterans. So a lot of black San Diegans are people who were posted here, mustered out and said, damn, this weather, I'm staying, right? So one of the things to realize is that's an important part of the population. Another thing which people don't pay a lot of attention to is the following. This is the immigrant share of black Californians. And if you go to the right-hand side, you can see the share of black Californians who are immigrants rising pretty consistently from 1990 to 2021, going from about 3% of the black California population to about 8%. But that is more profound here in San Diego. In San Diego County, it went from about 3.4% to about 11% of black San Diegans are actually foreign-born. Perhaps more significant is to ask the question of the share of black children, how many have at least one immigrant parent. So what this looks at is the state of California, and then it looks at San Diego County. In San Diego County, more than a quarter of all black children have at least one immigrant parent. When people say that immigration is not a black issue, or that the immigrant movement should not include black Californians, they are not looking at the actual data. So I know you have a great group here, PANA, the Partnership for the Advancement of New Americans. Yo, shout out to y'all. This is an extraordinarily important group that's been lifting up these issues, and it's not just because they are who they are, although they are who they are, but it's because this is an important issue for black California. Family structure, and then we'll get to some of the economics. This is an important part of thinking about what the demographics look like. This is for state of California for what's called the first five population, kids between 0 and 5. And you could see here that one thing that's very different about the black population in the state of California is the relatively high share of kids growing up with only one parent present. That's a little bit different, actually, in San Diego. In San Diego, 61% of black children have both parents present. Now, let's turn to economics. And by the way, I know that I'm going through this pretty quickly, but that's what they wanted me to do. I also, when I am done, have to leave about 15 minutes afterwards. So all questions about this data should be referred to my colleague, Dr. Kim Tabari, who's right here, ready to answer any question. Including, why the hell did he say that? So, couple things. One thing, and I think this is so important for people to pay attention to, is that San Diego has actually done pretty well on job growth. So it's actually had job growth since 1980 that's exceeded the state and exceeded the nation. San Diego has actually, and remember I'm saying San Diego, I'm not saying black San Diego. San Diego has actually done pretty well too on another really key measure, which is what kind of jobs are being created, that is what's the earnings for the jobs. And you could see here that relative to the United States, San Diego generates some high-wage jobs. But the question is, who gets those high-wage jobs? And I think this is really important to go forward because often we hear political figures and business folks lift up the need to grow the economy. You hear that? You got to be asking the question not how are we growing the economy, but how are we growing our economy? The economy that we live in, the economy who are the people you care about. And by that standard, San Diego and California have not done very well. So what this first shows you is just wage inequality generally, then I'm going to break it up by race and ethnicity. So what this shows you is wage growth for full-time year-round workers who are at the 90th percentile, meaning 10% of the workers make more, 90% make less. Then the 80th percentile, 20% make more, 80% make less. The 50th is the median, folks in the middle. Then the 20th and the 10th are folks at the bottom of the wage distribution. And what you can see here is that in California as a whole, the top wage earners have done very well. And in California as a whole, the bottom has fallen out. In San Diego, your top wage earners have done very well, including at the 80th percentile, but you've been flatlining at the bottom of the wage distribution. So when people tell you San Diego's a job machine, it may be generating jobs, but it's not generating equity. We can look at that too by looking at unemployment by race and ethnicity. And one of the things that you'll notice here is the fact that the black unemployment rate is about twice the white unemployment rate. And maybe even worse, and we'll get to this in a minute too, is that that has not changed since 1990. So the persistent disparity in unemployment is key. Now, what I want to say, in Spanish we say plantear, plant as an idea, is that we need to be thinking about this from the point of view of asset stripping and reparations. Because if you don't have access to jobs, you don't have an opportunity to grow assets, and your future is being stripped from you. So a lot of our current economic data can be put in this language of asset stripping and in this language of reparations. If you turn to the percent of families living below the poverty line, and here we use 150% of the poverty line because California is a very high-cost state, and the poverty line for poverty level for a family of four is like $30,000, which is not poor, that's just like super poor, right? So economists for the state of California generally use 150% of the poverty line. What you can see here is that while there has been some improvement for both black and Latino families from 1990 moving to the current period, that the poverty rates remain more than twice as high as they are for white San Diegans. I do want to take a minute here to point out something, because I think Dr. Weber lifted up, I think, something very interesting, which is how do you think about taking the reparations issue, black inequality issue, and tying into the fate of other groups in the state of California. The senator did that as well. And I think that one thing to realize is that the Asian poverty rate is actually higher as well. The Asian population has some really high income earners, but it's got some really poor communities, super heterogeneous. And so when people are looking for allies, I think it's important to look at the diversity in that community. So what explains the job issues and what explains some of the income inequality? I'm going to say that it's multiple factors. One factor looking at San Diego has to do with another form of asset stripping, which is the denial of educational opportunity. Because that's what economists call human capital, investments in your earning potential. And you could see here that for the white and Asian population, about 50 to 60% have, this is for adults 25 to 64, prime working age. By the way, that makes me realize I just turned 68, so why am I still working? This makes no sense. But anyway, if you look at that data, you can see the very high college completion. That's the sort of green top bar. That's much lower for Black San Diegans and much lower for Latino San Diegans, who actually also have a very high share of folks with less than a high school degree. So when you're looking at the lack of access to jobs and the earnings, educational differences are certainly part of it. But there's another thing for you to be paying attention to and lifting up. This is a complicated chart, but it's worth spending some time on. What this chart does, moving from left to right, is it says what's the level of education you have. And you could see something your parents probably told you, which is that the more education you get, the higher your wages. But what you can see here is that at each and every level of education, there is a wage penalty for being Black or Latino, and actually most people don't realize it, for being Asian. But if you look carefully, you're going to look at that data and you're going to say, wow, that data says that at the top is from 1990. Manuel, how lazy were you that you didn't update your data for 2.5 decades? What I want to show you is that's the pattern for 1990. What we would hope is that if we go forward to the current period, that there'd be no wage penalty, right? That if your education got lifted up, your wages would be the same. Here's the sad story. The wage penalties are worse. That is, at each and every level of education, there's still a significant wage penalty, except for Asians with a college education. Asians with a community college degree, high school, etc. Certainly there's a Black wage penalty. A couple things about this. For Latinos, some of that wage penalty has to do with uncertain migration status. But for African Americans, it's generally a combination of two things: discrimination in labor markets, which continues to occur, and network effects. Network effects meaning who you know, what they connect you to, how you're able to move into better employment. That's asset stripping. If you have an education and you cannot get the same return from that education, that's asset stripping. That's what reparations seeks to address. Here's another couple of things that are important. This is, over time, severe rent burden. Severe rent burden is whether or not your family pays more than 50% of its income in rent. And what you can see here, moving from 1980 to 2021, is that in general, rent burden went up, but look at that second bar, which is the bar for Black households, consistently have the highest severe rent burden, and it's gone up dramatically over the last decades. Severe rent burden is asset stripping, because when you're paying so much of your income in rent, you don't have the money to save, to start a business, or to do one other thing, which is buy a house. And this shows you home ownership for California, following the gold bars, which is for Black Californians. What you can see here is home ownership is consistently lower than for other groups, and it actually fell between 2000 and 2011. Black Californians were the group hardest hit by the 2007, 2008, 2009 financial crash. What does that look like in San Diego County. Even worse. What's that look like in San Diego City? Even worse. Finally, just a couple of other charts, and then I'll start to close up with a stirring and emotional conclusion. So this is household median income. So median means half higher, half lower. Household income, the money coming into your household. This is San Diego County. And what you can see here is something not unexpected given all the data I just presented, which is that white household income, median 98,000, much lower for black folks and Latino folks, a little bit higher, often bigger households. Asian, Native American, you have a small Native American population. The next chart, same chart, same scale, same groups, but I'm going to focus in on households raising children under the age of 5. Watch what happens to the income gaps. So I'll do that again because I really like the noise some of you made. So what you can see is that white households raising children have more than twice the household income of black households raising children under the age of 5. And that's baking inequality in. So the work that Dr. Weber and the Black Caucus are talking about, more crucial than ever. This shows you a couple things I'm going to jump over quickly, but we'll make sure you have it, which is digital access. I do want to focus in on environmental conditions. This is the level of exposure to particulate matter. And what you can see here is it's much higher for black and Latino folks, Asian folks as well, than for white San Diegans. And then there is something called cow and virus screen. The state legislators will be familiar with it. It's a measure of how overexposed environmentally your community is and how socially vulnerable it is, and then you're assigned a percentile. This is the disparity in those measures in San Diego County. For white, for black, and Latino folks, you could see that it's almost twice as high as it is for white folks in terms of this measure of environmental disparity. There's finally some data by wealth, but I'm looking at the time here. Perhaps this is no surprise. This is statewide level, but national level. You could see here the big gaps. White households did get hard hit by the early recession of the 90s and, of course, the financial crash, but have since recovered. Much lower for black households, Latino households. One last data point. This is essentially a measure of small business startups. And by the way, it's small businesses that have paid employees. So not just you working for yourself, but whether it's you're really growing capital in a business. And it's the rate of firms per 100 workers, California, LA, Inland Empire, by race. You'll note that particularly in San Diego, the rate of black business ownership is 1/6 of what it is for white San Diegans. So again, less assets, less wealth, less ability to move ahead. So let me close with a few thoughts and with Mark's total surprise that I actually closed on time. How can an academic do that? It's not in our characteristic, is it, Dr. Weber? So the thing I want to lift up is to think about equity and reparations, but particularly equity, in terms of past, present, and future. In terms of identifying past harms and seeking to correct those. In terms of ensuring full participation in policy design in the current moment, which this kind of gathering is part of, but also in terms of thinking about futures that could create disparities. So, for example, when folks say we're going to grow San Diego's biotech industry, but don't in the same breath talk about raising minimum wages, encouraging unionization, lifting up the fate of service workers, you're just going to generate disparity in the future. Or when your downtown comes back and it results in gentrification and displacement, people will say that was unintended, but it was not unanticipated. And so how do we have a forward-looking vision on equity to understand if we're doing something now, what inequalities might we generate? Second, and the reparations report did a good job of this, and hopefully today our team did as well, how do we disaggregate data so we can look at the different experiences of different groups and use that for accountability? Our shop, the Equity Research Institute, for example, works with PolicyLink on the National Equity Atlas. I don't know how many of you have seen that, but the National Equity Atlas has disaggregated data for the largest 150 metros, top 100 cities, all 50 states, plus DC, 400 counties. It's the underlying database that generated the presentation today. We also do the California Immigrant Data Portal. But finally, I think it's also about trying to set a goal of reversing generational and racial disadvantage. Looking, for example, at the data I was pointing to on not just median household income, but median household income for our children. And understanding that the equity goal, the reparations goal, the reversing generational and racial disadvantage is something that will accrue to the benefit of nearly all Californians. Because when you have this level of over-incarceration, you're throwing away talent. When you have this level of disinvestment in the education of black and brown children, you are shortchanging our productivity for the future. When you have a system that allows uncertain immigration status to prevent people from starting businesses or accessing benefits, you're shortchanging children and the future of California. So equity is everyone's business. Thank you.
Was that information helpful to you all? My name is Dr. Corey Jackson, Assembly Member from the 60th Assembly District in the Inland Empire. And it's my pleasure to kind of walk you through what is the Black Caucus doing to begin to create the solutions for all of that data. But most importantly, that data is to help you to decide what you gonna work on. Right? Are you gonna be working on the home ownership front? Are you gonna be working on the business entrepreneurial front? Are you going to be working on the child poverty in terms of the number of our children growing up in poverty in our households? What are you going to work on in your community? Because no matter what legislation is passed, if we don't get to work, we can't put those laws into effect in a meaningful way. So leave here with your own commitment about what you're going to work on. I remember seeing one of those good old viral videos of Maxine Waters, and she said, you know what? Y'all always telling me, you go, girl, but you know you go. Why are you always telling me to go and do something? What you gonna do? Right? So remember that. What are you going to do? The good news is, when it comes to black politics, is that black people in California continue to punch above their weight. You need to know that. We continue to have historical numbers when it comes to representation in the state legislature. California, we make up about 5% of the state's population. We represent 10% of the state legislature. Out of the constitutional officers, how many of them are there? 8. 3 of them are African American. Right? That's something to be said. Now, what are we going to do with those numbers? And how are we going to deliver reparations for our people? We've already said it before about our membership, 12 members, 3 statewide constitutional officers. But we need to make sure that we understand in terms of what the kind of messaging we're also going to be using. We know this for our history. Whenever you do things for black people, everybody else succeeds, and sometimes they succeed even more. You help us, you're going to be okay. Right? So we have to make sure that we understand that reparations, of course, is to making sure that we get what we need to restore our community to its traditional greatness, but yet also making sure that we also tell the story about how this movement is going to help all Californians. We've already talked about the reparations process. You have the original creator, what some people now say, the godmother of reparations, and also from Senator Bradford as well. So I'm not going to go through a lot of the things that has already been talked about when it comes to reparations. And you've heard it over and over again also, that need to know the report, right? Remember Sankofa. If you don't know where we've been, you don't know where we're going. Right? So if you're not reading the report about your own people, I don't know where you think we're going to go. Right? And then, of course, making sure also this is a QR code to all of the activities and research and hearings that transpired during that time. I'm going to keep going. So really, when we talk about reparations, we want to make sure that, just to summarize it, breaking it up into 3 categories. Acknowledgement. California did some stuff to our people to ensure that that data looked the way it looked. Wasn't by accident. That California created a strategy, a systemic strategy, to ensure that our people would have those type of outcomes decades and centuries later. And they knew what they were doing, and they did it well. Acknowledgement. So the first thing we had to do as a Black Caucus is to ensure that the state legislature itself, that the governor, that the very institution of California acknowledge their plan of doing this to our people. And Dr. Akilah Weber carried the bill that is moving through the legislature now to ensure that we formally acknowledge what California has done. The second thing is an apology, right? Assemblymember Reggie Jones Sawyer is carrying a bill to ensure that California officially apologizes for what the state of California has done to our people, right? The next thing, which is the rest of our bill package, is about beginning the process of atonement. Now, y'all need to understand, in those over 1,000 pages in that report, there's over 100 recommendations. It's going to take some time to get through all of them, right? It took some time to get us to where we are today. To do all this stuff to us is going to take some time to repair all that, right? But first, we have to do some time to educate the rest of our colleagues, to making sure that they even know what California has done and what they can do to ensure that what they can do to help to get these things done. So number one, our goal is to educate legislators. And then to apologize. And then now to commit themselves to helping us to get these things done. A part of it is a lot of the things that need to happen to ensure that we help with the economic, educational foundations of what we need to do and to restore our families and restore our communities. There are many legal barriers in place that even if we introduced the bill, the Constitution would say it would be illegal. So part of what we also have to do is we have to eliminate legal barriers so that future bills we introduce won't be kicked out. You understand that? So I want you to make sure, so when you say, well, why didn't you do this recommendation? Why didn't you do this recommendation? Well, there's a lot to be said that, number one, California's Constitution says, nope. You introduce that, people are going to be very litigious, and they're going to take it to court, and it's going to be thrown out. As a matter of fact, they want us to introduce some bills right now so they can take it to the Supreme Court. Do you want anything about our people to go to the Supreme Court right now? Okay, I just want to make sure y'all ain't crazy, all right? But you need to understand, so there's many things we have to consider to pave the way for future and bolder action, all right? So this is not about, oh, they scared to do something big. No, we gangbang when we need to, okay? Don't worry about that. All right? We do what we need to do to making sure that people put some respect on our people, all right? That ain't it, but we ain't stupid either, right? And so we've got to make sure we do that. And of course, we have to navigate the state budget situation as well, right? But believe this, every year we go to the powers that be, the leadership of the legislature, and we make sure that we let them know that we're going to have, in our legislative package, we're going to need this amount of money from the state budget, right? And most likely or not, they'll give us the go-ahead as long as it makes sense as long as we can prove that California can afford it at any given time. All right? So please make sure that you know that we have other things. And then also, this is the first time that there's ever been a legislative package on reparations. So we want to make sure that also we have some wins we can start building up too. Because people need to know when you do things in reparations, the state is not going to fall apart. Right? That all these bad things are not going to happen. As a matter of fact, it's going to improve the entire state as a whole. So we have 14 bills right now. Out of those 14 bills, we have 2 constitutional amendments. Okay? Don't worry, we'll get you the information about what all those bills are. Okay? But the idea is that we have 14 bills. 2 of them are constitutional amendments to help with the Constitution itself. The first one, ACA 8, is to finally take slavery out of the state constitution. And then ACA 7 is to begin to weaken Prop 209, our other foe, to our people as well. So we are going after the Constitution, but also we're going through the laws as well. And they are representative of all the different issues we're dealing with. So there's issues dealing with health, healthy food, criminal justice, education, economic development, right? All of our bills are not just focused on one area, but we want to make sure that every year we touch every area that talks about what do we need to be able to thrive. All right? So we need to understand that if we're going to, when we restore Black California, we restore a California for all. As you can see, California don't work for everybody no more. Well, it never worked for us. It don't even work for the people that it used to work for anymore. Right? And so there's things that we need to do to make sure that we do that. So we went through a whole process as a Black Caucus to work through our communications plan. And we want to make sure that you all are aware of it, and that we will be sending you information in terms of this plan as well, so that you can, to help you to articulate to people why we need reparations, okay, and how it will be beneficial. We know what the governor said in 2020. I hope we can lean into this moment, but in the spirit of so many lives that are impacted every day, to address the structural racism in institutions that fundamentally have to change. We already talked about the idea of our wealth gap. Understanding that wealth isn't simply financial. If we don't own nothing, we're not wealthy. Right? So we talk about reparations, we have to talk about our own safety. There's never been a hate crime report where Black people were not at the top of the list of hate crimes. There's never been a hate crime report in California that's ever been published in which Black people were not the top victims of hate, discrimination. We got to get healthier, y'all. All right? You don't have to go to Bob's Crab Shack every day. All right, I'll stop. All right? Quality education, career opportunities, appreciable assets, family legacy, passing wealth on from one generation to the next. All right? These are the things that we're focusing on when it comes to reparations. We talked about all of these statistics already. We talked about, and remember, all of this is also in the reparations report in terms of all the things California participated in terms of our people. And so when we talk about restoration, we have to also make sure that we also talk about hope. What is the hope for our people? What is the hope for our children? Because that is definitely linked to the success of this state. And yeah, we're going to be starting to do some swag, y'all. Don't worry. Y'all get some swag too. All right? So the idea is is that this is a journey. And we want to make sure that by the time you leave, that you are plugged into that journey, because this has to be a statewide movement. A statewide movement. We cannot achieve justice and stay comfortable at the same time. Are you hearing me? You cannot achieve justice and comfort at the same time. So yes, we are going to have to be uncomfortable in the things that we have to do to achieve justice for our people. What are you going to commit yourself to? And you're going to have an opportunity to commit yourself to that as well. So we're going to bring up, talk about our next section here when we talk about you getting plugged in to this process. Before that, we're going to start bringing up our members of the legislature, the Legislative Black Caucus, to make sure that you have an opportunity to also participate in some Q&A. And what we're going to do is that we're going to be passing around some cards. Cards are starting to pass around now, in which you can write down your questions. So we're going to ask members of the Legislative Black Caucus to come on up and take a seat. And the moderator, of course, will be your very own Dr. Akilah Weber. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Jackson. And I know some of you are probably feeling like, oh my goodness, he's running through those slides. Well, we're trying to get back on schedule, and a lot of the information we know that you all had heard from some of the previous presenters, but we will make sure that some of this information is available on the California Legislative Black Caucus website. You know, when I was reading through the executive summary, one of the things that stood out to me dealt with our Supreme Court. And I'm going to read directly from the executive summary. California's law prohibiting non-white witnesses from testifying against white Californians protected white defendants from justice. The California Supreme Court warned that allowing any non-white person to testify would, quote, admit them to all of the equal rights of citizenship, and we might soon see them at the polls, in the jury box, upon the bench, and in our legislative halls, end quote. That hit me pretty hard because there are 12 members of the California Legislative Black Caucus. We are in those legislative halls every day of the week. And we oftentimes talk about, you'll see people wear signs that say, we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. And I realize that we in the California Legislative Black Caucus are California's founders' worst nightmares. They did everything that they could do to prevent us from being there. And so, that's why I think it's so very important for us to understand the foundation of this country. And I always say that the foundation of an organization, you always fall back on it until you're able to break that foundation up and start something new. And so as we started, I really want to thank my colleagues some of my colleagues for coming to participate. Sometimes people forget that there are Black people south of Los Angeles. So I really appreciate them coming down. But that foundation is something that we'll talk about, because the more you try to do, the more that foundation comes out. And I'm sure some of my colleagues will get into that. But I want to start by asking my colleagues, how do the proposed bills in the reparation package aim to address systemic economic disparities experienced by Black Californians?
As I said before, when we talk about economic development, making sure that we're starting to build wealth, there's a number of bills that talk about making sure that we have an opportunity to, number one, reclaim stolen land. Senator Bradford will probably talk more about that, as he's the author for that. But then also making sure that we have access to other job training opportunities as well, in which Assemblymember Tina McKenna and Assemblymember Kevin McCarty is also doing those bills also. So the idea is how do we make sure that we have the education and the training necessary to be able to that, number one, we recoup the land and assets that we once had, and then subsequently in future years is about how do we make sure that we get more access to be able to finally recover from the home ownership loss that we had during the Great Recession.
I'll just piggyback as the author of SB 1050 that deals with the racially motivated taking of land. As stated during the task force, we saw where hundreds, if not thousands, of families were displaced and moved off their land just because of cities using eminent domain and other racist tactics to move them off the land. And we can, again, name a variety. But to be truthful, I don't see that as reparations. I see that as atonement, and I see that as restitution. Because if I own something and you return it to me, you haven't given me anything that I didn't have before. It's just like if I have my car is insured and it's stolen, and you either replace my car or return my car. You haven't given me anything I didn't have before. But it is the beginning of the healing, and those are some of the examples, again, of the lingering effect of racism in this country and the after effects of slavery that will help us kind of like right the wrongs there. So we see where there are hundreds of examples of individuals who have lost their properties. And so if we can begin there, it will be an example of what can be done. Because again, generational wealth is not based on the money that you have in the bank, but the land that you own. The most wealthiest families in the state and in this country own thousands of acres of land or thousands of pieces of property all across the state and all across this country. And we have been denied that because of many of the racist policies that were implemented shortly after the emancipation and freedom of slaves. So I think that's a starting point, and I won't say it's easy, but we can identify that the same way we identified the Bruce's Beach situation. We've also now heard about Silas White, who was a prominent landowner in Santa Monica, who had created a spa. And the city came along in 1960 and said, you know something? We need this property for a parking lot. Well, Know what sits on that property today? A 4-star hotel. And the city of Santa Monica still owns that land, and they cannot collect revenue every month from that. That revenue should be going to the descendants of the white family, if not return the land to them directly. So there's plenty of examples like that.
First of all, my colleagues introduce themselves. Mike Gibson, I represent the 65th State Assembly District. You probably say, where is that district? Well, I represent Watts, Willowbrook, where I was born and raised. I represent Compton, Carson, North Long Beach, Harbor City, Wilmington, and also San Pedro. And so I'm glad to be part of the California Legislative Black Caucus. And so I have a bill dealing as part of the reparational package, Assembly Bill 2862, and it prioritizes African Americans of enslaved, descendants of slaves, to making sure when we go for licenses, we're moved to the front of the line. That's important when it comes down to jobs. That's important when it comes down to just existing and being able to be part of our success that we believe, I strongly believe, that this reparational task force have shown us in the 1,100-page document. And again, just want to piggyback on what has already been said. Please read the executive summary. I think it's absolutely important. My colleagues who have already talked about this particular answer or question have said a lot, but I just want to throw that in there and look forward to the rest of them. I'm really looking forward to questions from the audience, too, so I'm going to make my comments very brief. Dr. Weber.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, and we are gathering those questions from the audience. So you can see those who are walking around with the cards. You can either get a card or give your card to one of our people in the audience. So my next question, our esteemed Secretary of State spoke about the fact that with AB 3121, which established the Reparations Task Force, that there was bipartisan support. We haven't necessarily seen that now with our bills. And so I'm just asking my members if you can speak to any of the challenges or obstacles that we have had or you expect during the development and passage of the reparations package. And maybe Senator Bradford could also talk about some of the more recent attacks that he's had with one of his bills with one of the members of the Assembly. You can start, Mike.
Okay. Some of the attacks, I know that the caucus collectively, anytime there's a bill that's being heard in committee, there's our responsibility to stand in solidarity with that author, going to the committee, standing or sitting to show strong support. So if you can imagine if Senator Bradford's carrying a bill and that bill is being heard in a committee, all of us are going to stand with him because we want to send a strong message that we're in this fight and we're standing in solidarity. And so some of my Republican colleagues have taken upon themselves to make this a very political issue, voting no on all of our bills. Any bills that deals with reparation, they're voting no. And some of them don't have the sense enough to just shut the hell up, but they want to move forward with having commentation on casting lies and dispersion in terms of how much these bills are going to cost, and talk about also the immigrant status and how they were not a part of what transpired in California. And so, it's our responsibility to want to educate our colleagues to what's going on, but also letting our colleagues know why this is important to Black California, why this is important for us to right the wrongs, and also making sure that reparation move forward, and also building a coalition, because we know that, as my colleagues say, we're 10% of the legislature, and we need our colleagues who are part of the Democratic Caucus, but also making sure that other ethnic groups are supportive of us, whether it's the Jewish caucus, whether it's the LGBTQ caucus, whether it's the Latino caucus, the API caucus. We stand in solidarity, and we want them to stand in solidarity with us to show that kind of support.
Yes, as Assemblyman Mike Gibson stated, much of the opposition to the bill so far has been along party lines, but truth be told, there's some folks who probably have D's behind their name that are having a little bit of hesitation as well when you have offline conversations about how this package should move forward. And yes, this week, one of the Assembly individuals attacked me and stated that this is going to cost the state $800 billion. I says, you can't put a price tag on almost 300 years of enslavement. I says, and we understand reparations will not be a cheap date, but it's minuscule compared to the harm and the cost that we have suffered through this country. So it's minuscule compared to the overall harm and damage. And as I've stated to many of them, that says, well, we didn't own slaves. We didn't do this. We weren't here at that time. But as I stated, if you can inherit generational wealth, you can inherit generational debt. It's many folks who have inherited millions of dollars, and they weren't here when their ancestors earned it, but they're benefiting from it today. This is a debt that is old. This is a debt that's 160 years overdue, and that's what we're trying to share to our colleagues and some of our so-called allies that, again, this is not charity. This is something that is old and, like I say, 160 years overdue. So that's the message that we're going to continue to preach or present as the bills move forward.
The greatest challenge is, I think, that similar to whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, everyone always thinks that they will stand on the side of justice until you have to sacrifice something to make sure someone else gets it. And I think that's going to be a constant issue that members of the legislature will have to face, that many communities will have to face, because justice and sacrifice go together. Equity and sacrifice go together. And the problem is, and it's actually, in many cases, it's the problem that we actually have right now with our young people. And that is that your parents and your grandparents did what they were supposed to do, give you better opportunities and leave you better off than when they had started. We will be the first generations to not do that for the next generation of our children. Our children are no longer guaranteed with better opportunities to live, work, build wealth before. Why? Because we're not willing to sacrifice for our children anymore. Now you're thinking, well, I do it for my kid. But guess what? If a whole community is not willing to do that for your child, they're not going to be better off. Right? And so I think the biggest challenge is going to be for people to look into themselves and say, to be able to advance the dignity and humanity for all people, sometimes it means you having to take a step back. And the question is, the moral question is are people willing to do that? And that's going to be a tough question that every member of the legislature is going to have to answer for themselves.
All right, we have our first question from the audience, and I'm going to combine kind of three of them because it's all kind of around the same. But we've talked about some of the legal barriers that we have. Can you all provide examples of what some of those legal barriers are, and also specifically in reference to how are we going to get around the issue of racial preference, and also with ACA 8, how are we going to ensure that slavery is prohibited among incarcerated people? So we can start talking about some of the legal aspects that we're trying to tackle.
Well, one of the legal challenges, when I presented Assembly Bill 2862 in committee, I think it was a business professional, and so one of the speakers who were speaking in opposition to the bill, again, this bill set making sure that we prioritize African Americans when it comes down to jobs and also professional licensing. And there was one of the arguments that was made that we are violating Proposition 209. And so many of you know about Proposition 209. We took it on. We was unsuccessful in that particular fight, but it was important for us to do that, to raise the visibility, to talk about the unfairness that exists in the state. And so we went back to our legal counsel, and we're certainly on good footing when it comes down to Assembly Bill 2862. And so a lot of these bills that we hope to get to the governor's desk this year. And I want to also underscore, it's not a quick fix. It's not something that's going to take place overnight. I term out in 2026. Senator Bradford term out in 2024. It is our responsibility to make sure that the next members of the Legislative Black Caucus pick this up and continue the ball on. So it could be a long time, maybe 10 years, before we actually get all of this work that we're doing, passed and on the governor's desk and signed into law. And so it's going to take a lot of people putting up money and also trying to derail what we're trying to do, because again, there's a strong movement afloat, and I believe it started with the little orange man in Washington, D.C., trying to invoke a lot of racism and also division that takes place. There will be people that will be challenging the work that we do. And so we have to make sure that we cross every T and dot every I when it comes down to it. Every time someone raises an issue, at least when it pertains to my particular bill, I'm running to our legal counsel to making sure that if I need to amend it in some kind of way, that I do that so it can pass without any legal obstacles. And so I believe that it's going to take place, but we're up for the fight.
And we were very intentional during the task force working along with the Department of Justice and the Attorney General's office to make sure that we crafted the report where it was in many ways race neutral. But again, as Dr. Weber defined and the task force agreed, communities of eligibility, those individuals who are descendants of chattel slavery. So that can encompass a Latino if they were in chattel slavery. That can encompass an Asian, a Caucasian. But we were very intentional. We know the majority of the folks look like us who were in chattel slavery. I also had to amend my bill 1050 as it dealt with the racial motivated taking of property. So again, that we wouldn't make it specifically just to African Americans, because then it'd be a violation or run up against 209. So again, if anyone can show that their property was racially motivated taken, then that bill will apply to you. One of the folks who've already reached out to us is some of the Latino community that lost their home in the late 50s for the Dodger Stadium in Chavez Ravine. That property was taken to build a ball field. So we had to craft the legislation so we can make sure that we would skirt not going up against the 209 race-specific rule that shouldn't exist anyway. But point is that we have been very careful and deliberate on, as our legislation moves forward, that it's centered on who we're trying to serve without stating it specifically. So
the legal barriers issue is something that will always frustrate many of you, and it frustrates us too, because many of you will say, well, why isn't this bill just for black people? Because it's unconstitutional in California, right? Trust me, all of our bills will say black people in it if we could, right? So the idea is this is where we legally find ourselves. So we're going to do the best we can with it. But again, we also have some constitutional amendments to try to break that legal barrier as well. So just understand the context, and that's why in our inaugural package, we're also trying to eliminate that legal barrier so that we can, again, do things that are very specific.
Thank you all for that. And before I go on with the next question, I know we did a lot of introductions of electeds at the very beginning, but I did want to acknowledge that Assemblymember David Alvarez from Assembly District 80 is now with us in the front row. So the next question kind of piggybacks on something that you mentioned, Senator Bradford, and how does one determine if they qualify for reparations?
Again, part of the major debate in some of the earlier task force meetings was establishing the community of eligibility. And again, it's very specific. If you're a descendant of chattel slavery here in the state of California, or you lived in California, arrived, I should say, prior to the early 1900s, you're eligible for consideration for reparations. Again, that's part of the work that the agency will do to help identify those individuals and make sure that they qualify and are eligible for reparations in the system, and doing their lineage, doing their background checks, because we all know slave owners didn't keep accurate records of their slaves. They were many times just listed as a number, not by a name, not by a birth date. It was by a number. So it's going to be a challenge, but that's what the agency is going to be there for, to help weed through all of that and assist individuals, because I've heard, we heard it from many people. I can't chase my lineage back that far. And it's going to be some help. But what we also learned in that process, that the Mormons have amazing records, and they've assisted with helping find background information and lineage information with a lot of folks so far. So we're going to lean on them as well to assist us moving forward.
Thank you. What is the strategy for organizing Black Californians that have been displaced to more rural regions of California that may not have, Black representation?
This is the first stop of 6 in which we are going to places large and small to be able to make sure that, number one, their voices are heard, but they're also getting connected to this statewide movement. So we're here in San Diego. We'll be going to Santa Barbara. We will be going to Fresno. We will be going to the Inland Empire, of course, Oakland, Sacramento, Elk Grove as well. And so the idea is we are trying to make sure that you don't have to go to Sacramento in order to get connected, that we're coming to you. We're empowering you with the information, and we are getting you connected to our information stream, because there might be a time when we say, what's up with your state legislator? We need you to go knock on their door because they're not giving us their vote, right? And so we will be going to those areas. There's other places also that we're going to be going if we do this again. I mean, we still have to go. We talked about Vallejo. We talked about places like Bakersfield. We've talked about places like Hesperia. There's places all over California that are having growing Black populations that we want to make sure that we engage them early and get them connected to the entire diaspora.
If I could just piggyback real quick. And I think I want to put the call out to each and every one of you. As my colleague, Dr. Jackson, indicated where we're going. We've already been to Los Angeles. We were at the Bunch Center at UCLA. It was just so many people there. But I also want to put the challenge out to you. Because you're here and the networks of people that you interface with, please share this information with them. It is important that you just don't come here, receive this information, and do nothing with it. It's important that you share this information, tweet it out, post it on social media, reach out to one of our offices so that you get the information where we're going to the next particular area in California, and ask some of your friends to meet us there so they get the information so they can begin to share this information with the village.
Timeline to pass the key landmark elements
key optimistic timeline is this year. For the landmark, we have to build a foundation, and I think we have 14 bills that are moving through the legislature that clearly sets the groundwork and the foundation to move forward. So I think Dr. King always spoke to the urgency of now. It is the urgency of now to get these 14 bills passed. Being realistic as to the additional expansion of reparations, it's going to take years, if not decades. We know that already. We saw the opposition to on the federal level with H.R. 40 that the late Congressman John Conyers introduced year after year after year. So we know there's still tremendous pushback on embracing and owning up to the debt that is owed. But I think this year is critical. We often say, so goes California, so goes the nation. I think this is a great opportunity for us to set the tone for the rest of the nation, because we've seen a lot of states have followed, a lot of cities have followed with standing up reparations programs, but I think it's critical that we get these 14 bills through both the houses and to the governor's desk for signature to signal to the rest of the country and the rest of the state that we're serious about this.
Yeah. Thank you. And also just want to remind everyone that this is going to be a multi-year effort. We are estimating at least the next 5-10 years where the Legislative Black Caucus will introduce a package of bills in order to be able to get through all of the recommendations from the task force. So this is not a one and done. It is not something that you'll only see for this year or next year. We are committed, and I believe Assemblymember Mike Gibson alluded to this, that even as some of our members are leaving the legislature, the ones that we are bringing in, we are ensuring, and the ones that are remaining, we are ensuring their commitment to finishing up this process. And so this is just the beginning of a very, very long journey. So we had a couple students in the audience, and they are questioning what are some of the opportunities for students to get involved, whether they're in middle school, high school, or college.
Well, I think the first thing is, if you're in middle school and high school, is that you are the ones that are going to make this world a better place in the process anyway, and it's you that is saying, I don't know if you like the world that y'all inherited, but what y'all giving us ain't gonna cut it. And so I think it's important to, number one, educate yourselves. Make sure you're reading the executive summary as well, so that you can better educate yourself in terms of the state that you live in and the history of the state. But then making sure that you also are introducing it to your parents and your family members as well, so that you can encourage them to get involved in this movement also. And then, of course, making sure that you are registered to vote, and then making sure that you are connecting yourself in this process. You can also contact your state legislator. You can also create the atmosphere and the pressure on state elected officials to making sure that they will vote on our reparations packages. And so your voice is important, your energy is important, and your moral clarity is even more important as well.
All right. Next question, how can we leverage community and social organizations to push this forward? Some of y'all are Greek up here.
I think by your presence here today as a prime example of how you can do that, and going back into your community and educating, again, your family members, but your allies, but some of your non-allies as well. I mean, because a lot of folks do not want to know the truth. A lot of folks still are in denial, and it is imperative that we continue to take this message home so folks understand the real truth and the role that California played in slavery and the debt that is still owed to those individuals who sacrificed so much so we can live in a state and in a nation as great as it is. A lot of folks made sacrifices for that. and we fail to share that story and tell that story. As I stated earlier, there are stories that made America, and there's the stories that America's made up. This is the story that made America. 300 years of slavery made America who she is today, and we need to tell that story. We need to tell the story that 10 of the first 13 presidents owned slaves. We need to tell that story. But a lot of folks are unaware of that. And we need to, like I say, educate ourselves. And as the African proverb goes, until the tale of the hunt is told by the lion, the story will always favor the hunter. Well, again, we need to tell our story, and we need to make sure our allies as well as our non-allies know the truth.
And just to piggyback on that, I just want to remind some of you what Dr. King said. Life begins in the moment you start being silent about the things that matter. In the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. How many of you will be found guilty of being silent on the things that matter? We are at the brink of changing history in California. There go California, there go the rest of the nation. I feel the pressure, Dr. Weber, I feel the pressure. Senator Bradford, Dr. Jackson, I feel the pressure because it's my responsibility not only is to be a member of the legislature and a member of the Legislative Black Caucus, but the responsibility that rests upon our shoulders to get it right. Not being found guilty of being silent. Reparation matters. It will change not only history, but also generations to come. And so if we're unsuccessful in doing the work that we were called to do during this dispensation, then generations will fall. And so the responsibility that each and every one of you have, taking a Saturday out of your busy schedule to be here, is to help us in this fight. If I represent Kappa Alpha Psi Incorporated. We want to pull on them, the Greek community, our fraternities and sororities. We want to also pull on the 100 black men. We also want to pull on the NAACP and others to be part of this movement to help us get these bills across the finish line in order to see the real reparation, but also the success. As the doctor indicated with the slides that were up here, which I thought it was a real telltale story. We have work to do, y'all. We have a lot of work to do. And it's not just one of us doing it, it's all of us doing this work. So the call and the challenge is put out there.
Thank you for that. So a couple questions about our ACAs. First, the ACAs need to be out by June 27th in order to qualify for the ballot. What can our community do to ensure that our ACAs are out and able to be on the ballot? And then the second one is that the ACA concerning slavery in prison was watered down to still allow for forcive labor in prisons. The question is, will that be what is voted on by the bill legislative deadline next week, that new language?
Sure. I think that, number one, the good news is that both ACAs are on track of meeting the deadline. The ACA 8 was just voted on last week out of a committee on the state Senate side, and so after that, we anticipated being able to get through the process for a floor vote. And if there are, after this panel, you will be you'll have an opportunity to sign up for our action alerts, so that if it is your legislator who is saying they won't be voting for it, we want to make sure that you know that, and so that you can take action. ACA 7 is going to be referred out of our Rules Committee on the Senate side to its committee as well next week, actually on June 19th, to be able to go through the process also. And in both of them, there are two things. Remember, we have been conditioned in California and even around the nation that when you hear certain words, you have negative reactions to them, when actually they're actually good things for people who have been harmed. And so when we think about what language is going to be on the ballot, we find out that sometimes the more descriptive you are, the more confused people get. And then the more confused people get, what do? You said, oh, I'm going to skip this question. I don't know, right? And so that's the problem that we're facing in both ACA 7 and ACA 8, in which sometimes we wanted to go for the whole shebang. But if you go for the whole shebang, you may not get anything at all. And so that's the issues with the amendments that you are seeing even in ACA 8, is that with this original language, when we did polling across California, you began to see a weakening of support because it started to cloud people's understanding. And so the amendments that you see in ACA 8 is actually to clarify, to make it even more simplistic. But of course, we also know when you do something more simplistic that you're also watering down its effectiveness. But this is what we do know. The only times that we can really get things done constitutionally for black people are during presidential elections. Because that's when the most people of color come out. Come on. That's when most progressive people come out, right? And so the question is, do we go for the whole shebang and then we lose everything and then we have to wait 4 more years to get something done? Or do we continue to chip away at this elephant that's been growing for hundreds of years, right? And then get a win now and then come back again 4 years and continue to chip away at it. And we just don't think in many cases that we can afford, and that our children and the next generation can afford, a total loss that will then take us 4 more years and hope it wins again. So this is just really a strategic question, right? And some of us will say, well, let them vote it down then. Well, you okay with that, but will your children be okay with that? You see what I'm saying? So it's not that we're not in agreement of what we're trying to accomplish. We may have a disagreement on strategy. Right. And if we know we can get the votes now, we don't know what the next class of legislators are going to be like. And so that's kind of what we're facing right now.
Thank you for that. How do you plan to prioritize community-based solutions and restorative justice practices to black communities and address the root causes of disproportionate incarceration rates?
You've been working on this forever.
Yeah, I don't think this, again, will be you can compartmentalize that to reparations. We've been fighting that fight for the 14 years that I've been in the legislature and for decades well before I got here. This is a systemic problem, and you've had legislators, black, white, Asian, Latino, Hispanic, who have been fighting to right the wrongs that clearly exist. So it won't be necessarily a reparations solution to this problem, but an overall collective movement, and I won't want to say progressive movement, but a reform. Again, Dr. Shirley Weber was a prime example of that effort with the removal of deadly force here in the state of California. And we did that 5 years ago, so before there was a reparations task force. So we have continued to move in that direction legislatively, and it has always been a priority of the Black Caucus to take on issues such as this, because again, many times we're the community that's impacted more so than those other communities. So we will continue to do that, whether I'm in the legislature or not. They were doing it before I got here, and I have no doubt that the legislature that succeed me and for decades to come will continue to fight to make those reforms that are still systemic and impacting communities of color all across the state and all across this nation.
Thank you for that. And thank you for that question, because it prompted something that I don't think we have addressed today, which is the California Legislative Black Caucus has a package of priority bills. The way in which we came about those priority bills is we, looked at the recommendations from the task force. We ranked them as to what we could get done in a single legislative session in this, financial climate as well. And we as a caucus voted on which ones we could all support. That being said, there are bills that each of us are carrying that are not a part of the Black Caucus legislative package, that do specifically come out of the reparations report. So, for example, I have a bill, AB 1919, that specifically deals with restorative justice in schools. I had a bill a couple years ago that required the California Department of Education to go out and get, best practices, evidence-based best practices in regards to restorative justice practices in schools. And so AB 1919 now comes behind that and basically states that, okay, now that we have this and it'll be placed up on the website, that schools must use one of those restorative justice practices in certain circumstances before jumping to suspension or expulsion. That is one of the recommendations from the Restorative Task Force. You won't find that within the 14 bills that we have as priority. So I would also encourage you to look at the bills that each of us are carrying as members of the caucus, because as Senator Bradford just alluded to, some of the recommendations within the Reparations Task Force, the caucus has been working on for years, even prior to this. And so in addition to looking at what we're doing as a caucus, also go and look and see what each of the members are doing. We couldn't put every bill into our priority package, but some of us, and most of us, are actually still carrying bills specifically dealing with reparations from the recommendations. It's just not a part of the entire caucus priority package. Next question: how do we leverage this need for reparations with our Latino colleagues or Latino allies? And another question is, in which ways do we utilize our allies to be most effective?
Again, I hate to make it sound so simple, but reading the report, educating themselves and each other to the issue at hand. I remember 4 years ago, after George Floyd lost his life, and we had a rally helped coordinate by, again, then Assembly member Dr. Shirley Weber, and we all gathered on the west steps of the Capitol, and it was close to, I think, 70-plus members who were on the west steps of the Capitol, and many of them took a knee and lifted their hands and fists up in the air for that 9 minutes that Mr. Floyd had that officer's knee on his throat. That same year, I had a bill for police decertification to get rid of those bad cops that we saw who killed George Floyd. We couldn't get it off the assembly floor. So I tell folks, we need to educate our colleagues who are allies when the cameras are running or rolling to become real allies in the real fight to move this legislative package of real reform forward. So it's also, again, true test of courage, real profiles in courage that we need from legislators, because far too often we show up for the press conference, we show up, for the media interview, but when it comes down to casting the real vote, a lot of them find a reason to hide behind it. So it's about moving those so-called allies into the forefront of being real champions for these issues. So that's a major challenge there.
And I would just like to say, just real quick, it's also about reparations, these bills. just like the civil rights movement and era, when black folks took the streets, the bus boycott and all those things. It didn't just help black people; it helped everybody. And so we know that one, if we continue to educate our colleagues in the legislature, how this is going to help our Latino brothers and sisters and our API brothers and sisters and things of that nature. So this helps us to help rewrite the wrongs of California, but also this helps everyone in California and make California a great state. But we have to first deal with reparation. We first also have to deal with our past, and this is the way we deal with our past, through the legislation that we're doing right now. Again, we need all of you to help us in this fight.
Lastly, I think when you talk about having other groups who may have similar issues or maybe not issues that may be totally different from ours, the idea is this, is that at any given day, there are many groups that it's our turn and their turn to be on the menu that particular day or month or season. So the question for us is, what are we doing to make sure that we have their back in time of their need, so that they have the empathy to make sure that when we need to count on them, that they will have our back. Right? This is a struggle of humanity, and we've all been harmed in many different ways. We've all been harmed by the state of California in many different ways, and in some cases similar ways. It's to understand that intersectionality of just the human struggle of marginalization and oppression, and the idea that I may not gain anything from having your back, right? But because I want your dignity and humanity to be honored like myself, I'm going to be there for you too.
That's right.
Because it's just the right thing to do. And if we can continue to be that North Star, that moral voice, that moral conscience of the legislature, then we believe that also it will be returned to us as well.
Thank you for that. We'll be concluding, but before I do, a couple people have actually given some suggestions that the CLBC should produce a voter guide for future elections, and asking people their positions on reparations, and also that we might want to create a strategy to restore Black Californians, since we see that our numbers in the state are either staying steady or dwindling. That we may be able to do something to encourage Black Californians to stay here or return. So our final question will be for each of my colleagues to answer. How do you envision the California reparations packages complementing global efforts to achieve racial inequality and promote social justice?
Well, interesting enough, members of the Black Caucus in November will actually be going to South Africa to also talk about their truth and reconciliation process. And they're interested in knowing the process they were going through in terms of reparations. So as they go through their process of recovering from apartheid, there's going to be some information and cultural exchanges going to ensure that we are connecting to the greater diaspora as well when it comes to our struggles. Because whether you go to Brazil, whether you go to Honduras, whether you go to Cuba, whether you go to the Caribbean, if you look at their data and you look at our data, in many cases, they are very similar, right? Because all people who are descendants of this chattel slavery are also being marginalized and oppressed by their governments as well. And so hopefully, as we begin to show what is possible, that will also ignite other opportunities similar to what we're seeing in other states in the nation in terms of they're going through their reparations process as well.
I just want to thank you, Dr. Jackson. Going through this process, I think for me, and recall a time when we had our first press conference. And at that press conference, there was a lady from my district who came up. She was there for another reason, but she heard about what we're doing, and she came to the press conference, and she said that you guys have given us hope. You're giving us hope. For those who've struggled for so many generations and felt hopeless, this gives us a hope to dream again, to believe again, to believe that the next generation that we're setting up for greatness, the next generation that we're setting up to write a new trajectory, a new journey, a new chapter, it gives us hope. And I think that through this work, we will give Black Californians hope again and believing again, believing that we're not getting written out, that we're standing firm, and we deserve to be here. And we deserve to have every damn thing that everybody else have, and even more so. And so I'm committed to this, committed with each one of my colleagues. We may be small, but we're very mighty in our work. But we're absolutely unapologetic. Let me say that again. We're unapologetic, and we give no pause. We are focused, and we are very deliberate in this attempt to, one, again, rewrite the wrongs of this state and making sure that we never, ever have to live again what we lived through and our ancestors lived through again.
And I would just say I see this package as, again, educating not only California, the nation, but the world of the challenges that we face, but we still face, but also tell the tremendous story of how we have been allies to the Jewish community. It was African-American soldiers who liberated them from Auschwitz. How we stood up for our Japanese Americans when they lost their properties during internment in World War II. It was black families in downtown LA that maintained those businesses and maintained those homes. That African Americans assisted our Native Americans when they were run off their land many a time. So we have shown through our leadership and our involvement and our humanity for our brothers and sisters, and now we're just hoping that it's reflected back to us, because we have been there and we continue to be there. And I think our reparations package will help amplify that which we have done, but more importantly, that which has been denied us simply because of racism and bigotry and just overall hatred in this country. And I tell folks, understand that this country was founded with a constitution that identified black folks as 3/5 of a human being, that wanted to annihilate and eliminate Native Americans from this land and wanted to exploit brown and yellow folks. This is this nation. It was founded by white men. And so we need to continue to tell the story of who America is, and this reparations package helps tell who America is and what it's done, but also the greatness of this country, despite all the challenges that we have faced, that we still have great potential to do great things. And I won't say completely heal, but start to right the wrong that has existed far too long in this country.
Well, I want to thank my colleagues, Assemblymember Mike Gibson, Senator Steve Bradford, and Assemblymember Dr. Corey Jackson for coming down here to San Diego to participate in this panel. Please give them a round of applause. We will now turn it over to a representative from the California Black Freedom Front, Mark Phillip.
All right, good afternoon. Let's have another round of applause for the CLBC members. You know, we have a tremendous amount of work ahead of us, and, you know, this is normally a season where we talk about graduation, right? And graduation is the culmination of things. Culmination of a course of study, but we have just went through an orientation. We are at the beginning. We are at the beginning of a journey that is really a multi-generational journey. You heard Secretary of State Dr. Weber earlier talk about how long the bill has been advocated for at the federal level around reparations. And we know that even before that bill, there was Field Order Number 4 following the end of the Civil War. And the reality is that this is a multi-generational struggle, that what we are doing and what we're up against is really going to require us to not only reach back and prepare young people now, but also to engage our elders and others to be able to propel this into the future. And so we are elated to be on that journey with you. As many of you know, the Black Freedom Fund was established in 2020 amidst the racial reckoning. Community organizers and funders came together and wanted to create an enduring institution that would essentially create the sustained investment in organizations that are building power in the Black community so that we could dismantle systemic racism. So our very purpose is tied to this important work that we're talking to you about today. Now, at the same time, we know that the conversations around reparations have not necessarily included the idea of what kind of like civic infrastructure we need in order to realize these goals. However, I want to make sure that you know that many of us who are at this table are making those connections and thinking very carefully about that nexus. And when the Reparations Task Force released their final report in June of last year, that was actually the same day that the U.S. Supreme Court issued their Students for Fair Admissions ruling, which effectively gutted affirmative action. Now, where am I going? The affirmative action ruling has been used as a Trojan horse, if you will, to attack all kinds of race-based programming. So for people who, you know, are opposed to reparations, they're using this kind of anti-DEI, anti-affirmative action positioning as a way to kind of gut institutions and programs that are focused on delivering justice for Black people and people of color more broadly. Let me give you an example that's local. Last year, the San Diego Housing Commission launched a program, a housing program for first-time homeowners of color, right? Giving them $20,000 to help them get on the path to buying a home and really building some assets and having some permanent shelter. That program is now being sued, right? That program is being sued by the same type of entities who are suing the Fearless Fund and who are claiming that the Fearless Fund is discriminating based on race because they're giving money to Black women entrepreneurs. These kinds of lawsuits are proliferating throughout the state. And it's important for you to understand that they are attacking institutions like ours, like the Black Freedom Fund, but also programs that are delivering real change for all of you and your communities. And so it's important for us within this context to be able to educate ourselves, to stand together, and to really do the deep organizing work that's necessary to bring about the change that we're talking about. And we're happy that with the Freedom Fund, we're doing some of that work. We're investing in professors to actually change this task force report into a curriculum that can be shared in classrooms throughout the state. That's just one of the things that we're doing, but we're also partnering with the CLBC to bring this state of Black California to the people in a real kind of grassroots town hall way that you've experienced today. What we're going to ask you to do now is to please tell us how you want to be engaged. We're asking people to use the QR code here on the screen. Just take your phone. Some of you got iPads. Take your iPad out and take a picture, or actually just hold the camera up and click on the link that pops up. And there are a few questions that we ask you. We just ask that you briefly take a moment to fill those out. And I'm going to answer a few questions that were given to us while you do that, so that we can get out of here in a timely manner today, because many of you have asked questions about how to follow up. And I want to be clear about what the process will be for that. So first and foremost, we're asking all of you who registered to make sure that you complete a survey following this, where we'll send you a little bit more information about what took place, what transpired today, and just ask you to kind of give us a sense for how you felt the day went. To this QR code that you're completing is really about the call to action and how you want to be engaged. This is going to ask you critical information about the way that we should be connecting with you as you are connecting to these various town halls throughout the state. Yeah, and what your priorities for reparations are. So this is the opportunity for us to hear a little bit more from you about what you believe is important, because as you know, there are a lot of recommendations that are being put forth. You have over 1,000-page report. We're trying to get a sense for, generally speaking, what matters to you. And this is produced by our wonderful colleagues at the California Black Power Network, who've been doing door knocking throughout the state on these specific questions and issues. So shout out to the California Black Power Network. If CBPN members, yes, please, round of applause. So yeah, pillars in the house, love it. So please do that, and then we'll be working with our partners to make sure that we are following up accordingly. We'll also be hosting all of the presentations that you saw today. We'll be hosting those either on our website, or we'll push them out to you directly. So it's important that we have your information. If you registered, you'll get all of this. In addition, for folks who want to go to these additional sessions that we're talking about, just go ahead and register on the website. Now, the sessions are meant to be for locals in those places, but they're not exclusive. People who are interested in the subject matter and want to know what's happening with Black folks in those regions can go. It's totally open. And so we encourage you to do that if you so choose. We also want to continue to keep the conversation happening here locally. We know many of you are organizing around these topics. Many of you are doing education. Many of you are committed to these issues and wondering how you can engage. We want to be a partner to you. We want to help elevate those conversations and dialogues and keep that discourse moving along, especially as we hit critical bill deadlines and other deadlines and milestones that are important to the success of this effort. With that, I want to also, yes, Ellen, I see you. Were you going to raise? Ellen, were you trying to get my attention? No, you're not. Okay, all right. I thought you were trying to get my attention. With that, we also want to make sure that for those of you who are interested in being more closely connected to your lawmakers, either members of the CLBC or other representatives who are representing you in your region, that we provide some connective tissue to help facilitate some of those conversations and dialogues. So the main thing that I think for those of you who are here today to hold in your mind is that we have, I think, about 12 members of the Black Caucus. There are 120 legislators. There are 80 members in the Assembly and 40 in the Senate, right? You need a majority, 50% plus one, in order to move anything in the legislature. And so I think oftentimes the questions to our lawmakers are like, what are you doing? You know, how can you help us move this thing? No, but we have to keep in mind that they're only one vote. They are only one vote. And it's imperative that we are building more support within the chambers in order to successfully advance anything that we've talked about here. It's easy for any one of them to write the most radical proposal that exists in the task force report and introduce that. But it could actually do more harm if there is not enough of a groundswell support in the legislature to actually advance that. That bill would die immediately and the conversation would stop around anything related to that. And so our job collectively here is to create the echo chamber, to create the momentum that's needed to rally those other troops to the table in support of all the things that we want, all the things that we desire, all the things that our communities need. I hope that's helpful in framing where we are and what's next. Have y'all been able to complete this? You still working on it? That's, yeah, I'm gonna blame the California Black Power Network if it's no, it's no, it's a short survey. Please complete it. It'll be really helpful to us in knowing how to engage you and how to move work forward. With that, I want to make sure that I thank all of the people who were responsible for pulling this together. It's an incredible team from Assemblymember Dr. Weber, who, yes, let's shout her out, and her colleague, Chevelle Newell Tate has been incredible. Y'all see Chevelle, give her a high five. She has been hustling. My team, my colleague Jordan Theory here, my colleague Keisha Sexton, who is out there at the registration table, our colleagues Mary Lou Fulton and Sesson Holloway, just an incredible team. Assemblymember Dr. Corey Jackson and his team. If it weren't for these leaders, none of this would have happened, and we're grateful to the San Diego community for hosting us. So many, I look out into the audience, so many of our allies, Catalyst California, Pillars of the Community, PANA and United Women of the Horn, so many, Love Not Blood campaign is here, Green Lining Institute. So it's wonderful to see so many powerful leaders. We look forward to locking arms with you as this work progresses. And with that, I thank you. Oh, y'all might need to know the locations and the places. So we're just going to leave this here so you can take note of it as you file out. But San Diego, June 15th, obviously today. Thank you for spending Juneteenth weekend with us. Santa Barbara, July 13th. Fresno, August 17th. September 14th will be in Sacramento. Oakland, September 28th. And Moreno Valley, that's the Inland Empire, on October 5th. Thank you. Supposed to play some music, but I know. They're supposed to play it, but